So I was looking at some research the other day that said the average bereavement leave in the U.S. is 3 days. So when someone in your immediate family dies, the average leave is 3 days off of work. That's not someone outside your family. That's not a cousin. That's not an aunt or an uncle. It is your immediate family only. And grief often takes a lot more than 3 days, specifically with immediate family. But even grief of a friend can take a lot longer than that. But culture, this society we live in, is very uncomfortable with grief, very uncomfortable with death, and wants us just to move on. Just forget about it. Quickly, move on. Haven't you had enough time yet? Let's go. We're pushed to move. We even hear crazy things like, well, work will help him take his mind off of it. It doesn't work like that. It's like a complete misunderstanding of how the heart and mind work together and how grief works. Our culture wants to push for productivity and to push people beyond what is realistic. And so as we dig into grief, we don't get time for quiet. We don't get time for the silence required to process and to deal with it, to ask the hard questions of God that we need to ask, to deal with the intense pain in the heart and the mind. We don't get the time because our culture misunderstands. I read one author who said, we all want to do something to mitigate the pain of loss, to do something about that pain. And so we try to turn grief into something positive, to find a silver lining in the clouds. But I believe there is real value in just standing there, being still, and being sad. We've lost permission in this society to slow down, to stand still. People say, oh, you're being lazy or you're not getting things done. And so we don't get the time to process pain. Instead, everything is thrown into the microwave and comes out tasting exactly like microwave slop should. It doesn't give us the time to have healthy emotional process and to deal with the pain and the grief. Jesus himself said that it was said of him that he often withdrew to lonely places and prayed, and we talked about that last week. But we don't give people that chance. We don't give people a chance to deal with grief. One of the saddest things I've ever heard is some of the talk that goes on at funerals. And I know it's because we're just so tongue-tied and we don't know what to say, but I've heard so many wrong things that I've often talked about wanting to write a book about what not to say, to where I realized it's just a pamphlet, and the pamphlet would just say, shut up. Please don't talk. The end. $5. Like, I just don't know how to help because I've just heard so many awful things. I don't know if you know what a pastor does at a funeral, but like at the end of the funeral, inevitably, I have to stand at the head of the casket. And if there's family, then they'll stand with me sometimes. A lot of the time, they'll sit on the front row, and I'll be by myself up there. And so I'll be standing at the head of the casket as people walk by. This is for an open casket funeral. And at a memorial service, they even asked me to stand by the picture. And I'm like, okay. And I did it. And like, I just do whatever the family wants or whatever the funeral service asked me to do. But I was standing there, and I remember people passing by and just saying things they thought would help and were just terribly unhelpful. If you've ever read Job, or if you're reading the Bible plan of Job with us this week, man, as I was hearing that read to me through the Dwell app, I was like, oh yeah, I've heard stuff like that before. Like, not necessarily untrue stuff. Sometimes it is. Like, God got another angel in heaven, and I'm like, oh, this is not helpful theologically. But awful things too. God must have needed him more than you did. I know, some of you have said it. It's okay. Like, just ask for forgiveness real quick. But just don't ever say that. That is not helpful, ever, ever, ever. And if I only do one good thing in my life, hopefully it's that I help us at funerals. Just hug someone. If you're not a hugger, put your hand on their shoulder and say, we love you, we're praying for you, and put a period and stop talking. It's so much more valuable than trying to give advice. You know, when I lost my grandma, no. That's not helpful. That's microwave. That's garbage. It's just, I don't know how to help sometimes. I just want to be like, stop, move along. Because it's just, and it, you know, people are very forgiving. And if you've been through that, you've gone through grief, you're very forgiving to people. But it does hurt. people say silly stuff, especially when kids die, just awful stuff. And I'm just like, oh, that's not true, A, and B, that is not helpful. And even if it was true, but not helpful, should you say it? No. But we feel this compulsion to try to fill the space because we are so uncomfortable with silence. And I know, I've been to a couple funerals where it was done right. And to hear the sobbing, and there's no music, and there's just quiet, it's difficult. It's hard to process as someone that's not even related to the family. I know it's hard to process as friends. But sometimes that's needed. Sometimes that's necessary. Today we're going to look at a case where Jesus is confronted with this, and Jesus himself is expressing some grief, and so he goes away to be with the Father. I mentioned last time I found in the Bible at least 9 occasions where it's recorded that Jesus went away to be with the Father alone. And that, because Luke records often, I think it's much more than that. We don't have everything that Jesus did in those 33 years. So today, though, we're going to look at one of the situations where Jesus does go alone in Matthew chapter 14. And it's an interesting story. This is about the death of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist and Jesus, very close friends. And John the Baptist, if you'll recall, in the beginning was setting the stage for Jesus' entry. He was baptizing, saying, I'm not the Messiah, but the Messiah is coming. He was trying to kind of prepare the way. He was the first person to kind of really set the stage for it's almost here. Time has almost come that the Messiah is here. And so Herod, this evil ruler, Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, heard about Jesus. And he said to his advisors, this must be John the Baptist raised from the dead. That is why he can do such miracles. For Herod had arrested and imprisoned John as a favor to his wife Herodias, the former wife of Herod's brother Philip. John had been telling Herod, it's against God's law for you to marry her. Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of a riot because all the people believed John was a prophet. But at a birthday party for Herod, Herodias' daughter performed a dance that greatly pleased him, so he promised with a vow to give her anything she wanted. At her mother's urging, the girl said, I want the head of John the Baptist on a tray. Then the king regretted what he had said, but because of the vow he had made in front of his guests, he issued the necessary orders. So John was beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a tray and given to the girl who took it to her mother. Later, John's disciples came for his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus what had happened. As soon as Jesus heard the news, he left in a boat to a remote area to be alone. But the crowds heard where he had headed and followed on foot for many towns. Jesus, looking for a moment alone, didn't find it. And actually, the story that follows you have heard probably, because it's even in modern culture, about where Jesus feeds the 5,000 with the fishes and the loaves. It's interesting to me, once again, that we find Jesus getting into stressful situations, making a big decision last week and looking for the leadership of God, so he went away to be with the Father. In this case, there's 2 things happening in this story. The first is Herod is evil, and he is causing problems, so Jesus needs to talk with the Father. Second thing is John is dead. We don't know the exact time frame there. It's not recorded between when Jesus goes to be alone, but it follows the very next verse, so I think it's probably dual nature of why he's getting away. So it is, once again, like last week, leading. He wants the leading of God, and the silence provides that, but he also needs some time away. And if you think about it, people are constantly following Jesus because they're hearing these good stories about him, and so they want to be around him, and he is a people person, but he also is a human and needs a little bit of non-stimulating time with people. He needs a little bit of quiet time away, and he wants to spend that time with his Father, God. So this chapter, twice in this chapter, Jesus goes away. There's a later recording in the same chapter that Jesus goes away to be alone with God. And one of the keys that we find in Jesus' life is that when he's being stressed out, or when there's a lot of pressure on him, or there's a lot of concern, he goes and he listens, first of all, and then he obeys the Father. And those 2 things seem to be linked hand in hand, because how can you know what God wants if you're not listening to God? And so he goes away, he listens to the Father, and he obeys the Father's will. And many times, the discipline of solitude is what has created this environment for this opportunity to happen. Jesus experiences profound loss, and so he goes away. He doesn't go away to solve the grief, like to erase the grief, but he does know at that moment what he needs more than anything is to be in the presence of the Father, not to escape it, but for the presence. And that's kind of the key word I want to focus in on today, the presence. Because solitude last week was all about who's leading you. Are you being led by the voices in this world? Are you being led by social media or by whoever's the loudest on TV or whatever politician or ideology is hip in the moment? Or are you listening for the voice of God? And that can only be done in silence. We have to turn all the other garbage off because the inputs will overwhelm the still small voice of God. That was last week. This week, what I want to turn to is the silence, the solitude also offers an opportunity for healing. It offers an opportunity for healing because it gives you an opportunity to be in the presence of God. And I fear one of the things that we are starving of, one of the things that we thirst and hunger for right now is the presence of God. And we fill it with so much other stuff, but it's like we're eating cotton candy. And if you've ever eaten too much cotton candy, and I have, confession time, so weird you're a diabetic. You guys got to stop saying that. Yeah, I remember one time at a carnival as a kid, I think the bag was taller than I was, and I just went to town on that cotton candy. You know what they call it in Britain? They call it candy floss. Isn't that weird? That's an aside. That's free. I'm not going to charge you for that. But it's candy, right? It makes more sense. Cotton candy. But cotton candy, it's good at first, isn't it? And then eventually you get a little overwhelmed, and eventually you're like, oh, I need a drink of water. Something's wrong here. And then all of a sudden you're like, sugar high. And then if you don't stop, you get sick. That's kind of how that goes. I got sick that day, and I remember being ill from too much of that. And that's what we do with junk in our life. We listen to all this outside garbage that can't heal us, that can't bring us into the presence of God, that doesn't want to lead us in a good direction. And it feels at first like maybe it's going to solve something, but at the end of the day, it's very unfulfilling. And so when pain is heavy on you, if you're in grief, if you're facing a loss of a job or a loss of a relationship, or someone died in your life that you're hurting over, whatever that pain is you've carried into this moment or that trauma that you've carried in this moment, when pain feels that heavy, you've got to do something with it. Unfortunately, so many times we do negative things with it, but we're offered an alternative. And that is that when the pain feels too heavy, dwelling with God becomes our deepest relief because it can heal. There's no sorrow or pain or trauma too big for the kingdom of heaven. But I fear that we don't get to experience that so often because we try all these other ways before we go to the source of real healing. We miss out. And when we miss out on that, it is painful, and it like multiplies the pain that we carry, right? Because we just keep trying silly things that keep falling flat, and we're like, well, maybe the next one will work. And we're like that eternal optimist, but we have no real hope. If you think about what happened here, Jesus needed to not hear from his friends in that moment. He needed to spend time with the Father. Job learns this lesson in the Old Testament that I was alluding to. In the scriptures, it records that his friends sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Now, the weird thing about this story is that was the best ministry those friends did, just sitting with him in silence. And if you've had a friend that can do that, you know how powerful that is. Not trying to give you advice, not trying to one-up whatever's going on in your life with their own story, just that will listen and sit with you. Now, that was love. In the Old Testament story of Job, when it goes wonky, when everything goes off the rails, is when his friends start talking. That's when everything messes up. And God rebukes them. Because even a lot of what they said that was true wasn't helpful. Something can be true and not be helpful. You've got to filter that stuff. Something can be objectively true and yet not pastoral and not helpful at all. Explaining things, fixing things, theorizing about why it might have happened. These are all worthless. They do nothing And the reason that so often we talk that way, whether it's a funeral or someone's going through something else, is because we are so uncomfortable with silence. And I think that we need to get a lot more comfortable with silence because we see how powerful the biblical examples are of going away to be with God, and when someone else is hurting, just being quiet with them. Not ignoring them, but being comfortable with the silence. Jesus said one time, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." This kind of rest is accessible to every single one of us, but it doesn't come as long as we are listening to other voices. And I'm telling you what, sometimes our friends have the worst advice. We ask them for advice. What do you think I should do about this? And like Job's friends, they are terrible with advice. Not because they don't like us, but because often our friends are trying to tell us what we already want to hear, right? And they're judging our non-verbal communications, and are we smirking, or are we frowning, or are we And they're trying to then play off of that and try to keep the friendship okay, and they'll just tell us what we want to hear. And if they don't, then we're like, well, I don't know if I want to be their friend anymore. Like, even if they told us something that was more helpful. So that's just not really great. The real healing comes from someone that can carry the burden with us, not just hear the burden, but carry the burden with us. And Jesus says, I will give you rest. And now the word rest, I was like, what kind of rest are we talking about here? Because when you get a translation from the Greek into English, it changes things up just a little bit. And so we have this Greek word, anapao. And this word is closely related to our word for pause, right? So like pause or slowing or stopping movement kind of. Jesus doesn't in this word promise to remove all the pain in our life, right? It's not like, okay, you come to me and instantly it's all like just not there anymore, right? It's not that kind of thing. Instead it is, come to me, and I will help you through this. I will give you rest from this, but it's like a pause. It's like a moment of stoppage, but it's not completely ending. It is to walk through it. It's a gift that Jesus gives us and to carry the burden with us, to walk with us through the difficult parts of life, not that we will avoid all of those moments. And Martin Luther King Jr. said it this way as we prepare to celebrate the holiday tomorrow. He said, "Only in the darkness can you see the stars." This is one of the things that reminds us some of the time why we go through difficult days. It helps us to remember that not only is this world not our home, and we are looking forward to an eternal resting place and a place where there is no pain and suffering. I say it every Sunday, right? In our blessing time, I talk about this idea of a time that the book of Revelation speaks of where we will not have any more suffering, no more tears even. But we don't live in that time yet. We're here right now. And there's hardly a time that I don't even watch the news anymore because it was just wrecking me. But there's hardly a time when I don't hear about something in the news and it just wrecks me. It just gets my heart. And I think there's two responses going on in our culture right now. There's those that can ignore the news completely or that it hardens their hearts. And there's the rest of us who see it and are just broken and we just don't know what to do. We're just like, I don't like this. I don't want this. This is not the world I thought I would raise kids in. This is not the world I thought I would grow up to be an adult in. This is awful. But I don't know exactly how to pull us out of this awful, terrible spiral we're stuck in. And that can be very, very challenging to where I need to go, I got to step away from all this and I need to go spend time with the Father. I need to talk to Jesus in this time. I need to say, Savior, help me through this. I need to mute the noise of culture and all the talking heads out there. And I need to listen for the still small voice of God calling me out, telling me that there's no sorrow too big for Jesus to carry for us. We have a home, but our home is not here. But the cool thing about Jesus and the mercy and peace and grace he brings, it's not just for tomorrow. It's not just for later, for the afterlife, as some have said or have kind of gotten their heads wrapped around. It is healing and peace for then. It is also healing and peace for now. And we miss the dual nature there of what Christ came to do sometimes. That was most clearly made out to me this summer. Wendy and I had a chance to travel to the Vatican in Rome, and I was totally nerding out. I mean, just completely geeking out. I mean, I was that tourist just taking too many pictures where they're like, okay, move along, American. And I was like, oh, one more, and let me get a selfie. And they're just like, ugh. The poor guards there, the Swiss guards, they were just like, oh, what is this guy all about? But there was so much beautiful art there. And for me, as a Christ follower, as a pastor for 25 years, I mean, I'm like, I've only seen that in a book. I want a picture of that. I want to see that. I want to, all of it was so exciting to me. But this room in particular, I was just really reflecting on the art that was on the walls, and then this painting here of Christ on the cross. And I was just really kind of celebrating it. And I saw something so funny happen that it just blew my mind completely. And that is that there was a mom and her two daughters over here just out of the picture, and they were doing a TikTok, a dancing TikTok, with that as the backdrop. I mean, do you want me to do it? You want me to? No, I can't. No, I won't. I won't do that to you. But I was just like, we are in the same room. We are in Rome. We are in the Vatican. We are seeing the same thing. I am in awe, and I'm taking a picture because I want to talk about this in sermons for the rest of my life. And they're in the same room, and they're having a totally different experience. The backdrop is just backdrop for them. They're just dancing and having a good time. And I'm like, more power to them. But I was struck by the dual thing happening. The tourist, the pure tourist, is just like, yeah, whatever. Let's move on. When's lunch? When do I get some pizza? I'm in Italy. Where's the pizza? Right? That's the pure tourist. And I'm there as a tourist plus. I'm there because I am fascinated with all of this in church history, and I've read about this stuff, and I studied this stuff extensively, and so I'm wanting to just soak it all up. And I thought about that nature. And maybe you've been to a museum and you've had that same experience where, people are running in front of the exhibit you're trying to read and how frustrating that is. Or maybe you were the person running in front of the exhibit and the rest of us were looking down at you. But if you think about it, there's two things happening there. And that's what's happening with Jesus as well. Everyone knows that Jesus answers the question of what happens at death. Jesus defeated death on the cross himself, and so his answer is that because he lives, you too can live. That answers the question of eternity and death. But what about the questions we have today? What about how do I carry this pain today? What about how do I rebuild relationships where I messed up? What about how do I ask for forgiveness from people that I have hurt? What about how do I give forgiveness to people that hurt me that don't care if I give them forgiveness? All of these questions are relevant right now. And here's the thing, Jesus also answers these things. That's what his grace and peace and mercy are all about. Jesus does not just answer the eternity question. Jesus answers the today question. He answers the future, but he answers the right now as well. And the next moment, and the next moment, and the next moment. You see, solitude is not a practice that makes you right with God or something like that. Don't get this mixed up. Jesus has done everything on the cross for us, and that grace takes us into eternity. But he didn't leave us alone. He didn't do this and go be with the Father and leave us completely here to figure everything out on our own. No. His grace, his peace, his mercy gives us the abundant life he meant for us today. We can spend eternity with Jesus, but that eternity can begin now. You can start to walk in the ways that he's given us. And solitude is one of the clearest practices that Jesus did, that he walked with the Father, and we can walk in the same way. So, what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, it means I give up my solutions, my quick fixes, my attempt to distract myself from the pain, and instead I go to the presence of God, and I sit with that pain, and for others, I am willing to do the same thing, to help them get into the presence of God, the only source of real healing. Culture says the opposite. Culture tells us, just get over it, just get through it. But instead, what if we were to say presence is far more important than progress? To accept Jesus' healing gift of grace is the first act that we do. We accept that grace. It is freely given to us. And then what do we do with this? Well, we practice this grace, giving grace to others, receiving grace for our daily pains and struggles. We don't rush through life, but instead we choose to simply dwell with God. And it might be solitude. And what could that look like? I mentioned earlier, it's not becoming a monk. I mean, they're the best at it, right? They don't talk at all, some of them. But we don't have to do that. You can take a walk. You can read a book. You can listen to some really good music. You can pray. You can have a cup of coffee. There are things you can do to inspire, to shut down, to have downtime, to take a moment out, to push pause, to receive that rest Jesus has for you. Like Jesus, when he would withdraw because he was constantly around people, he needed to recharge the human side of him. And so we, in that same way, are very human. And if Jesus needed that, we need that even more so. And could we be willing to be the kind of people that imitate Christ? And when I say that, sometimes people get really confused about what I'm talking about. Here's a great example. What would it be like to imitate Christ in this way, that we could sit with people in their pain, in their suffering, and not try to fix them immediately, but listen to them and be willing to sit with them in that time of pain? Henry Nouwen said it like this. He said, "The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not healing, not curing, that is a friend who cares." Man, loss changes us profoundly. Loss gets at our core. And grief can really eat at us. And it is so unfortunate that our culture rushes healing, or tries to rush healing, or tries to force people into unreasonable and unrealistic time frames. Downtime is needed. This practice of solitude and silence is needed to just breathe, to just process what you're going through. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit with someone who's going through that pain. So let me pray that for you today, that you would be willing to do that for others. You would receive that from Jesus. You would follow Jesus and accept his grace for eternity, for your eternity, but starting right now.